to you all. I hope you're all well. It's lovely to see so many of you here. I think there's about 34 of us so far, and about another 20 or 30 expected, so other people might pop in shortly. I'm Helen Ackerman. I'm the head teacher at Ludwick Nursery School, and we are the Hertfordshire partners for Reach Out Stronger Practice Hub. We're really privileged to join together with you all tonight for this session called Let's Count, where we're delighted to welcome Lucy Parker, who is the Deputy Head at Ludwick Nursery School, and Joanna Wells, who is one of our amazing childminders from Stevenage, and they're going to lead a session all about maths. Damon and I will keep an eye on things in the chat bar, and I'm sure Lucy will guide you through a few more things as she starts the session. Hopefully everybody's okay, and if you can just pop yourselves on mute if you're not on mute. Please do keep your screens on. It's lovely to see people's faces. Anyway, let's crack on. Over to you, Lucy.
Thanks so much, Helen. Okay, I'll just start sharing. So we've got a presentation this evening to have a little look at. So I'll just get that all set up.
Sorry, Lucy, shall I just check that we are recording the meeting, and hopefully that's okay with everyone. The Hub's got an amazing YouTube channel if you haven't seen it already, and we'd like this recording on there so that other people who maybe have booked and can't get along can have a look at that. So hopefully you can all consent for that. If nobody wants to consent for that, please let us know through the chat, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. So it's really lovely to see everybody this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. So how this sort of hour is going to work, we've got a presentation to share with you. We've got lots of information about maths. We've got some examples in practice, both in a childminder setting and in a nursery setting. We've got some video clips to watch. And then there'll be the chance at the end to ask any questions if you'd like to. We'll try and keep it as interactive as we can. I know it's tricky when we're on screens, but we will ask you to pop a few things in the chat as we go along, and Damon and Helen will keep an eye on it. So let's start. So just before we start, I just really wanted to kind of set the scene and sort of think about how we think about maths. If you're like me, you might have had a bit of a hang-up about maths for quite a lot of your life. And I think maths is one of those tricky subjects that if we've had a difficult mathematical experience at school, we often take that into our practice. But what I really hope by the end of this is that if you have got that sort of tricky mindset around maths, hopefully you will start thinking differently, because I absolutely passionately believe that teaching maths to young children is really, really exciting. And so forget about all that scary algebra that you did when you were a teenager. This is really, really different. But in order to teach young children maths, we do really need some really good subject knowledge around mathematical development for young children. So hopefully we'll really unpick that today, and you'll all go away feeling much better about maths. Hopefully there's lots of you that already feel really great about maths already. So really, one of the really key points I want to start with is we are all mathematical, and that is so important. Even if we don't think of ourselves as mathematical, we are. We are doing maths all the time, and we are born mathematical. So really seeing our children as capable and mathematical from birth is really, really important. I think it's also really important to stress that maths is practical and all around us. And I think sometimes the experience we have in school, and possibly the experience we are still giving our children, doesn't represent that. But what we have in early years is that amazing opportunity to really show children that maths is practical, and all those brilliant real life contexts that we can offer them. And I think also those meaningful contexts are really important. So hopefully what we're going to showcase to you this evening is how we engage children in really exciting and motivating activities. So the other sort of key idea I want to share with you is that it's really important that we model that thinking and learning together. And I think that will also help us gain our confidence. It's okay if we get some things wrong, and actually making mistakes is fine. And it's okay to model that to children and say, oh, I'm not sure, shall we work that out together? I think it's also really important that we remember maths is really creative. There's lots of different ways to get to one answer. So seeing it as a kind of creative process, I think, is really helpful than just one answer, and that's the only right way to think about it. The other thing I think is really important is if we have that good mathematical subject knowledge, we will be able to carefully plan those mathematical experiences. And I think if you think, we probably know lots and lots about how we would support young children to develop mark making and writing. We would know it's appropriate to have those kind of gross motor skills and gross motor movements first, and how we would plan for that. So if we really understand how young children learn maths, then we'll be able to plan things more carefully. And I think sometimes it's really easy to look on the internet, which is an amazing wealth of information, and we might see a nice activity, but we can often then present something that maybe isn't pitched at the right level for our children. So if we've got that really good subject knowledge, that will really help us plan those activities that are appropriate for our children. Okay, so I was having a little think, and we called this webinar Let's Count, and actually that is probably the wrong title. Probably what we should have said is let's develop good number sense, because that's really what we want for our young children. And actually counting is part of developing good number sense, but it's not the only part. So for those of you that aren't sure, this is a kind of really good definition. It's really that feeling for numbers, or that flexibility for numbers. And that's really what we want for children, that confidence around numbers. So really understanding how numbers relate to each other. So those relationships and patterns within numbers, understanding things like estimation and subitizing, having that confidence to problem solve, and that ability to recognize quantities. So this is a really nice definition, and I think that's a really good way to think about this. Counting is a part of developing good number sense, but there's lots and lots of other things that children need, and we really want them to have that curiosity and excitement around number, and seeing it as that kind of interesting and creative process. So I suppose the first question is, how do we support this? So what do we need to do in order to support developing good number sense with our children? And what we're going to do first of all is just unpick those components. And for some of you, this might be familiar terminology and subject knowledge, and for some of you, this might be new, and that's absolutely fine. So just to start off with, really thinking about subitizing. And I'm sure we're obviously all quite familiar with this word now. So when the framework changed for EYFS, this is now part of the early learning goal for number. So the requirement that by the time children finish reception, they can subitize to 5. But I think it's really important that we understand what this concept is. So it is the ability to recognize how many are in a small set without counting. So I'm sure if you're looking at the screen now, you can see really clearly that there are 5 pine cones, or you can see really clearly that there are 3 conkers. And it's important that we don't misunderstand subitizing and estimation. So estimation is different. Subitizing gives us that number, we instantly know what it is. Estimation is making a good educated guess, and children do need to learn estimation and have estimation opportunities. And as they obviously understand quantities more, they will be able to look at, say, a pile of sweets and sort of roughly say, oh, I think there's about 20. Or what they might say when they're young is, oh, there's 100,000, because they don't understand quantities. So subitizing is different to estimation, and that's important that we know the difference. I think it's also really important to point out that we can learn to subitize, or we can be subitizing before we understand counting. So if you think of your toddler, your 2-year-old, maybe walking in the park, and they might say, look, 2 dogs. So they're subitizing. They haven't said 1, 2. They can just see that there are 2 dogs. So they have that ability before they might be in that position to say, oh, can you hand me 2 apples from a larger group of apples? And actually what we now understand is that children from birth are looking really closely and starting to sort of see patterns and quantities. So if you think about a baby looking closely at its parent's face and seeing 2 eyes and a nose, you're starting to see those patterns and those arrangements, and that's supporting with subitizing. So with subitizing, there's also two different ways to do it. So I just want you to have a little look at the screen and the dots that are coming up. So just have a little look at those. And we're all seeing those in different ways. If you want to pop in the chat, you're more than welcome to say how you're seeing them. So for example, when I look at that, I am seeing 4 in a diamond and I'm seeing 3 dots around the outside. I don't know if anybody's seeing it in a different way. Is anybody seeing it in a different way? Helen and Damon, you can see the chat. So. But what this is showing us is there's 2 different ways to subitize. So there's that ability to see a small group up to about 5 or 6 objects, and you don't need any other mathematical processes. But then when you have a slightly larger group, what you need to be able to do is understand that you can combine those 2 quantities and you can do some simple addition. So it's still a form of subitizing, but you're able to add the 2 groups of spots together. So for example, I can see 4 and I can see 3, and I know that that makes 7. So I can see there's 7 dots there. And if I just tap, hopefully this will come up in a different way. Did anybody see 5 like that? Some people might have seen 5. And with subitizing, seeing those kind of regular patterns of shapes and dots. So if you think dice, that's basically the best way to see it. That is often how we see things. And that's one of the easiest ways to start subitizing, seeing it in that way. So that's subitizing.
Yeah, a few people saw 5. Put in the chat.
Yeah. It's really interesting, I think, how our brains work in different ways and how we see things in different ways.
Lucy, I think that's a really good example of really understanding our children as well. And particularly with maths, there is so, like you said at the beginning, there are so many different answers to things. Yeah. So actually it's making sure we haven't closed our minds down to just thinking that they're going to give us the one answer. So I think that's a really good example.
Yeah. And I think that sort of creativity and how we're all seeing things in a different way. We see the world differently, don't we? Okay, so just moving on. So the other thing that we want children to develop is that ability to count. And I'm sure we might be familiar with some of the terms that we're just going to cover now. But I think what it's really important to remember is counting is so complex. There are so many things going on for a child to count competently, even if we're just thinking about counting small amounts like number 3. So just to run through what they need to do. So children need to know number names in order, don't they? They need to understand that they say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And often children will get that number sequence quite early on. And I'm sure we've all had maybe parents who've said to us, oh, they can count to 20. And that is great. They can recite to 20. So they can recite number names in order, which is absolutely an important skill. But what they're not doing is physically counting 20. They're not going to necessarily hand you 20 pebbles. But that sequence is really important. So saying number names is in order is important. But also there's that sequence and synchronicity. So what you need to be able to understand is then starting to develop one-to-one correspondence, or you might have heard the term tagging. So that ability to point to an object and say a number name. And that sequence of being pointing, touching, saying the number name and moving across. And I'm sure we've seen lots and lots of children who haven't got that clear sort of one-to-one correspondence yet. They might have a row of objects and they'll say 1, 2, and maybe touch one thing, 3, 4, 5. And you can see they are starting to understand that need to point and count and tag, but they're not quite understanding that really set understanding of one-to-one correspondence. And that's something that we might need to teach the children to do. So then what we also have is cardinality, and this is ultimately what we really want children to understand. So this is how manyness. So this is really understanding that the last number counted represents the whole group. And that can actually be really confusing for children, because one minute you're saying to me, that's number 1, and then you're saying to me, that's number 2, and that's number 3. But now you're telling me that all of them together is just 3. And that's the cardinality. And actually what children need to do is get cardinality really securely, because then they can start to add and subtract and do more complex mathematical processes. So cardinality is key, and we can really help children learn that, you know, if they're not getting that straight away. But you'll know if they haven't got it, and I'm sure we've all done this. If, you know, get a child to count and say, well, how many, and then they recount, and then they might recount again. So what they're not understanding is that last number represents the whole group. And then the final thing that we need to think about is conservation of number. So that's understanding that however you arrange those three objects, I might put one up there and two down here, there are still three. So again, we might have got a child to count, they might have said three, then we might move them around, and then they might recount because they haven't quite understood that that quantity is going to stay the same. So there's lots and lots going on there. So really, hopefully what this is highlighting is really how complex counting is, and it's not going to just happen instantly. There's lots and lots of things that children need to do all at the same time and think about in order to learn to count. So the other things that they need are comparison and composition. So comparison is starting to understand that order and relative size of numbers. So as they become more familiar with the number line and quantities, they're going to understand that 5 is bigger than 2, that 10 is bigger than 4, and start to understand, you know, where those numbers come in the number system. And then composition is important because it's understanding that numbers are made up of other numbers. So you can see with that subitizing, we can start seeing that, oh, I can see 3 and I can see 2, but I know together that makes 5. So understanding those patterns and relationships in numbers is really key, and is also really exciting. Again, we can all see things in different ways. So just looking at some of the photos on the screen, and these are all different activities that are going to help children understand things like comparison and composition. So sorting, exploring loose parts, you know, sorting and filling with kind of tubs and beakers and those kind of things. Children will start to notice differences in quantity, differences in size. They might start to do some basic subitizing. They might look there and see, oh, I can see 2 conkers. And then having activities where children can start exploring things like one-to-one correspondence. For example, the child's put 1 dinosaur on each tree stump. So that's the beginning of understanding that one-to-one correspondence. And then having the sort of staggered staircasing resources, again, really seeing those patterns and relationships. Oh, I can see, you know, I've got 1, and if I add 1 more, I've got 2. So again, it's really understanding all those kind of number systems. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to stop sharing the PowerPoint, and we're going to have a little look at a couple of videos. I think it's really helpful to see some maths in real life context. And now we've sort of talked through what children need for good number sense. So we've kind of covered that subject knowledge aspect. When you're watching the videos, really have a think, what are those children understanding about maths and counting, and where are they in their kind of mathematical journey? So I will just stop this and just pop on to some videos. So the first video we're going to watch is in a childminder setting. So I know we've got a mixture of educators from both childminder settings and PVIs and nurseries. So the first one we're going to watch is from a childminder setting, and these are 2 little boys sitting at the table just having a snack. And I think what's nice about this video is it just that really good example of those real life contexts. So, you know, maths can happen everywhere. Particularly snack time is a great time to be exploring maths and having counting opportunities. So just have a little look at this. Really think, what do the 2 little boys know about numbers and counting?
There's 1 left.
Just 1 left.
There's 2 left.
Is there? Show me 2. That's just 1.
It's me.
That's it. Have you got 2 pieces now?
Yes.
Yes.
What's Aiden?
Aiden's at nursery.
Is that there?
Aiden's at nursery.
This and that's there.
Nathan's at school.
This and that's nursery. Nathan's one.
Nathan Guy, big Nathan. Nathan's 7.
Nathan's one.
No, he's not. How old are you?
And 2.
You are 2. How old are you, Ronnie?
13.
You're 13. You live at number 13, don't you? Yeah.
I live number 13.
You don't live at number 13. What number do you live at?
Number 3.
You do live at number 3. Can you remember what number Mel lives at? It's a big number, isn't it? 63.
63. And one more drink.
One more drink, go on then. You about finished, Ronnie? One more big drink? And then we'll go and start getting ready.
Okay, just to stop there for a minute. So they know a huge amount about numbers already, don't they? I think, you know, if you think the younger child, so he really knows about one, one more drink. He confuses about having two pieces of apples, but then he says one, and he knows a lot about numbers, and he understands numbers. He understands that there are numbers that label his age, and there are numbers for his house, and they're talking about quantities. So a really kind of nice opportunity to have a mathematical discussion, and really highlights that he's really starting to know things about, you know, developing his number sense. And the other little boy, he was subitizing, wasn't he? He's got that ability to look at the 2 pieces of apple and say, I've got 2. Okay, so just to look at the other video. Oh, hold on a minute. And we've got one more. So this video is from a nursery setting. So a completely different mathematical opportunity. So it's some children outside enjoying a kind of beanbag throwing game, but it's being used as an opportunity to explore some counting. So again, have a little think about what those children are understanding about counting.
Here you go. You did it! You threw the beanbag into the tyre. Wow, and another one. Okay, stand on your number. Oh, a little bit too far. Oh, Aria. Look, let's see how many we've got. You ready? Okay, count them back in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, there's some more in here. 8, 9, 10. 10 bean bags. There we go. Number 2. You can choose number 1, number 2, or number 3. We need a clipboard so we can mark down our scores. Go and get one. 1! I'll do it with my fingers. Oh, 2! You got 3. 4. 5. 7. 8. Oh, 9. 10. Well done. 2. Yeah. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now we know how many we've got because we've counted them. Yes. Oh, I'm going to try and see if I can throw it into this one. This is a bit further away. You ready?
Yeah.
Oh, 3, 2, 1. Yay!
Okay, so in that clip, we could see that the children were much more advanced in their kind of understanding of counting, weren't they? So it was a really nice opportunity to really emphasize that one-to-one correspondence, that throwing, that picking up of the beanbags, that counting them back into the basket was really, really emphasizing that. And the practitioner was emphasizing cardinality. Oh, we've got 10 altogether, knowing how many. So I think as we kind of move through the training, really thinking about that careful planning for your children depending on what they need. So you might think, oh, actually, I really need to reinforce that one-to-one correspondence for my children. And I think physical games, so moving or throwing things, is a really great way to actually feel that kind of one-to-one correspondence. Really, really helps them. And really modeling cardinality to them, modeling, oh, we've got so many altogether, really, really helps as well. So I'll just go back to the PowerPoint and we'll just continue.
Lucy, I was just reflecting on that clip and the strength of the modelling from that practitioner. And even though at the very early stage of that, the children weren't really using any mathematical language or counting, but it's just they're taking it all in, aren't they? And
Yeah.
actually to hear that little boy right at the end counting 1 to 10 because she'd repeated it and repeated it. That's sticky learning, isn't it, for them?
Yeah.
So that's a really nice illustration of how adults, the importance of adults modelling for children too.
Absolutely. And I think that is really, really key. You know, repetition is so important, modeling is so important, really emphasizing that language. And, you know, just thinking about, you know, just saying, oh, yes, we've got 10 altogether, just that sentence is supporting that understanding of cardinality. So I think really being really aware of, you know, the language and the role that we play in that mathematical development is really key. Okay, so just going back to the slide. So just before we start having a little think about sort of some examples of activities, the other thing I really want to highlight is the power of this question. And if you're not using it already, have a try, start using it. So really getting children to look closely is really key. So saying, what can you see or what can you notice? And also asking them how they see it is really helping children to look at those patterns and relationships. You know, if we're really thinking about noticing how numbers and quantities are connected, and if you look at the different photos on the screen, I'm sure, again, we're all seeing different things. You know, we might be looking at the chicks, and actually what's really sticking out to me is that there's one missing. I can only, you know, there's one space, but you might be seeing, oh, actually there's three pink, or you might be looking at the drinks in the tens frame and really noticing the gaps, that there's 3 spaces, or actually noticing there's 3 spaces and there's 3 milks, or looking at the cable reels in the garden and really seeing that kind of pattern emerging. So that looking closely is really, really beneficial for children. And I think you do really need to model that to children. You know, what can you see and how do you see it? And you might need to model that to them. You know, I can see 2 pink chicks and 1 white chick, for example. Oh, I can see 3 altogether. But that close observation will really, really help them develop that good number sense. So yeah, if this not something that you've tried already, I would really, really recommend you start giving it a go with the children in your setting. So I think this is just a really helpful reminder that in order for us to teach children early maths effectively, we really need to understand that mathematical development. So hopefully some of what we've talked about today, and obviously all the knowledge that you already bring, will help you. And actually, if we understand that clearly, then we can kind of assess and plan for our children in order for them to make that progress. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to hand over to Joanna. So myself and Joanna have been enjoying some maths activities in our settings, and we thought it's really helpful to have some good practical examples of things that you can do with your children. So Joanna's just going to share some activities that she's been doing in her childminder setting. So over to you, Joanna.
Super, thank you, Lucy. Well, yeah, for those of you who don't know me or haven't seen me before, yeah, my name's Joanna. I was an area lead for the Childminder Recovery Programme for the Department for Education. I'm an early years teacher, and at the end of this month, I would have been a childminder for 24 years. I have to say, it really feels like it today. But I was delighted to jump on tonight when Lucy made that invite, and then she said, "I'd like you to talk about subitizing." And much like Lucy mentioned at the beginning, I then thought, great. Okay, I've said yes. I really would have preferred it to have been about something else because my own relationship with maths, much like many of us, perhaps wasn't the best. And that really does reflect on how you feel about it. Unlike any other area of learning or the educational programs, you never hear people say, oh goodness, maths isn't, or people will say maths isn't my strong topic, or I wasn't that good at maths at school. And you have that barrier up. You don't ever hear people say things like that about speech and language, about physical development, or about understanding the world. So it was an interesting topic for me to do an activity on. And when we talked about subitizing, I think there's an assumption that everyone can explain it. And I just did a very straw poll of my really experienced colleagues who have a wealth of knowledge and expertise. And it wasn't to catch them out, it was to get some background in terms of a starting point for me. And I have to say, not one of them was actually able to explain what sabotaging is. And I think that's a really important starting point because sometimes if we're not using that mathematical terminology day in, day out, much like a foreign language, you forget how to explain it. But I don't think we should feel on the back foot because of that. So there's a couple of things that from my side of this training tonight, if you can come away with being really secure in being able to explain it, particularly, for example, if you've got a very special visitor coming into your setting and you really want, as an early years educator, to convey your knowledge and the intent of your activity that you've planned. So if you're thinking about sabotaging it, and as Lucy has said, it's not about estimating or having a guess or having a go or finger pointing and counting in your head. It's about that ability, a taught ability to be able to glance over a small set of objects and instantly know the number. So as an analogy, I would like everyone tonight to think about that small box of eggs. If you lift up the box of eggs and there's 3 and 2 in rows, there's 6. So if you can try and think of it like that, hopefully that will cement your knowledge. Anyway, she asked me if I'd do a sort of little activity around Easter. And I think relevance to age is just so important. So we'd initially spoken about chicks, very similar to the chicks that were on the slide previous. But I work with really small children, as a lot of my colleagues do, and as I'm sure a lot of you guys do. And it needs to be relevant to my children. The eldest children I work with are only just 3. And I looked at the chicks that I've got in setting and I thought, well, they're sort of small chicks and they're quite spiky and they would go in my young children's mouths. So I thought that's not going to work for me. That's not what I'd use in my setting. They might be all right for craft for older children, but I couldn't have them just as a resource that children would routinely just play with. But I thought what I do have and what's relevant to my children at the moment and what we're talking a lot about is bunnies. Obviously we've got Easter coming up. Fortunately, a couple of my children have got rabbits at home and it's of interest to them. We share photographs each week and we've been talking about their rabbits at home. We've got numerous books in setting. Lucy's popped some pictures up here. Here's some I prepared earlier. But, we've got bunny books. And if you're talking about cross-curricular as well, we've got opportunities to not just think about the maths activity, but also read the book, the rhyme, and use the word bunnies, but also then explain to our children that they're not really bunnies, they're rabbits. So we're talking about greater learning than just maths. We have been enjoying sharing the Guess How Much I Love You book, which is, of course, featuring a hare. So there's lots of interest to start with. But what I started doing was just gathering a few resources that I had around my setting. And while the children were playing and I worked from one room, I made myself a cardboard box just while they were playing. And of course, as you know, the minute you do something that they're not involved in, they were like looking as if to say, hello, what's Jojo doing? And I particularly just sort of said, carry on. I'm just making a box. So already they were interested. I sellotape the box together, just a piece of cardboard, and then I put it on my table and I left it there. And I could see they were looking and they were intrigued. And when we had snack, we talked about the box, but there was nothing on it. And I left it there till the next day. And then I brought the box out again. And I've got I've got a brick up machine, but of course you could use anything. And I'd cut some rabbit stickers out. And again, while the children were playing, I stuck those stickers on. So they were very interested. They could see that the stickers that I was sticking on were different colours, and I was putting different numbers of rabbits on each face of my cardboard box. And we talked about it and we sang songs, and they played with the small rabbits that I've got in interest trays and sorting trays. Some are little plush rabbits and some are plastic rabbits. So it's all very relevant. And again, I popped that box away so they could just look at it and think, oh, what's going to happen with that? Building the interest. And then finally, the following day, I said, oh, should we play with this box? And that's when our learning really started. And it was just with 2 children. And as I say, they really are only just 3. So it's no good looking at numbers of 10. And my dice itself has also got 1 blank square. So we were just looking at 1 to 5. And as it happens, I also only have 5 in each of my sets of rabbits. And I threw the dice and asked them, what can you see? And we went over this game again and again. And it was great hilarity. You know, it's something they hadn't seen. It's unique to setting resource, something that I really like. You could make something similar. Maybe your older children, if you look after older children, could contribute to sticking the stickers on or drawing on it. It could be extended in that way, but building interest might be vehicles, something like that. And their confidence grew, and over time and over the course of the days we kept coming back to it. So if, for example, we shared a book at story time, we then had a few throws of the dice, and that repetition throughout days and weeks, and it really helped them. We then extended the activity by moving on from the actual subitizing to estimating and to guessing, which again, from a cross-curricular point of view and a holistic point of view, I think is really important, because they are 2 different skills. And we started guessing and estimating what would fall on the dice, which from another aspect, obviously, you're then looking at sort of personal social in terms of you can't always be right. So sometimes the children were right and sometimes they were wrong, building different elements in, but always about number. It soon became apparent, though, that using this, and that you can see from some of the slides there, they then put the rabbits onto the squares, the stickers, but it became apparent that they were almost rote learning with it. So I had to mix it up a bit, because they soon learned that if it landed with the green on top, there were going to be 5. And there was great hilarity when there was none at all. I don't know why, but it really fascinated them. There was no bunnies. There's no bunnies on this time, Jojo. But then I mixed it up, and that sort of gets to the point of really testing their knowledge and being able to transfer that knowledge to different things and seeing it in different patterns. Because then I took my 5 bunnies, there's 5 tiny little plastic bunnies, and I sat and I said, right, turn around, no peeking. And they turned around, and I said, are they going to jump out of Jojo's hand? How many are going to jump out of Jojo's hands? So we were looking at the same figures that they'd been working with previously. But when I released some of the bunnies from my hand and they jumped onto the carpet, they were in a different pattern, and they were no longer green or pink, which represented 4. They'd got to know that. So we had to move away from that and really look at different patterns, and they had to look at a wider area to see the same 2, 3, 4, 5, or indeed no rabbits. But it's really just to say that within our settings, you know, we have just such a wealth of opportunity to help children learn those skills. If we're out and about as childminders, we might be doing school runs. If we're in preschools or nursery, we've got our outdoor areas. So we've got those patterns in the environment. We've got block paving, we've got fencing slats, we've got bricks, we've got decking boards. They're all full of pattern. And as we can see from the chat here, when we refer right back to the dot pattern from earlier, we all see things in really different ways, and to able to give our children opportunities to see small objects. And obviously I'm really acutely aware that we are working with very young children, so looking at I've got 10 frames, and I've got 5 frames of different sorts that are holding up here. One of these, actually, thank you, Stronger Practice Hub, was from a raffle, so thank you very much. So they're things that are obviously purchased, but we can make our resources as well. So I just had a piece of Amazon cardboard and some rather nice pink tape. So we made one as well. So it can be something that's really setting specific. So it doesn't have to cost very much. You can make things within your setting that are actually probably of more interest to your children than the things that they might find at home or anywhere else. Excuse me. And I think just dipping back in all throughout the day and referring back to the intent of what you're trying to teach your children really, really does work. So, and on the other side of this, just incidentally, just capturing somebody else's interests, which of course, if you're looking at a starting point, they need to be interested in what you're offering. So I've got one young chap who's fascinated with vehicles at the moment. So this happens to be an 8 parking space garage. But already he does know that if he's put 8 vehicles in the parking spaces, and I've put numbers onto this, our vehicle set of wooden vehicles is 10. So he already knows that 8 are in the garage and 2 are somewhere else. They won't fit in. So there's lots and lots of opportunities for extension. Just by gathering your resources, lots of loose parts are ideal. I mean, you can see them on the slides there. But loose parts are a really, really good way of enabling children to see patterns and to be able to recognise numbers in small groups. So I hope that's given you a little bit of inspiration in terms of the things that you can literally just pull from your settings and put together with a view to really teaching our children how to gain that skill, because it's not something we're born with, and obviously it's an entry into more complex maths concepts. But I would also say that if we're not familiar and using those mathematical terms each and every day, please don't feel like you're on the back foot, and just because the words sabotaging and all those other terms are not familiar to you, please don't let that be a barrier to the good work that you're doing with your children to get them to that point. So I hope that'll give you a few ideas. I'm just having a little look in the chat there. Making own 10 strain. Yes, thank you, Helen. But yeah, it doesn't have to cost any expense. And as I say, I'm a real believer in unique to setting resources, because I think they're very interesting for children. If children can play with something and use something in your setting that they're not going to have access to anywhere else, because you've made it, created it, built it, painted it, or whatever, I think that really is a great starting point for interest. So hopefully that will have given you a few ideas. And remember that egg box for the analogy of what we're talking about tonight, being able to glance at a small selection of objects and instantly know the number, not estimating, not guessing, not finger pointing and not really counting in your head, just opening that box of eggs and seeing 6. So hopefully that will give you a good insight and some ideas to work with. So thank you.
Thanks, Joanna. Thank you. That's really helpful. And I think, you know, what Joanna was talking about, I think that the importance of those motivating resources, but also the fact that they're not expensive. You know, we've all got tight budgets, whatever setting we're working in. So being able to make simple resources that really, really engage the children, and also knowing when to move the children on. So noticing that the children have got really good at seeing that kind of set arrangement of rabbits on the dice, and then knowing how to kind of move that on and support them with their
I think that's balance in between sort of rote learning. You know, it became apparent that they were almost saying the number 3 because they'd glanced at that yellow and the links were being made. So it's then about practitioner knowledge in terms of thinking, right, we need to move that on and test their knowledge in different formats. You know, that the rabbits are still there, but they're not going to be 3 in a line and they're not going to be yellow. Do they still know that there's still 3?
Yeah, that's sort of good challenge. So just to share something that we've been doing in our nursery setting. So again, just some examples of how you can really think about supporting children with their different mathematical concepts. So this is what's a nice activity to do is hiding something. And so in this activity, there's lots of eggs in a bowl and different amounts of chicks with different combinations of colours are hidden inside them. And if you want to sort of teach and help your children learn to subitize, doing what I call a quick show is really, really helpful. So building that anticipation, quickly opening an egg. How many can you see? So getting them to do that quick glance and that quick look, and using small quantities first to really help. And then obviously seeing that irregular arrangement of an object is to help with that subitizing. But then what's really nice is once the children have all chosen an egg and they open it up, then that really then leads into sort of that modelling of that counting. So if necessarily, model that one-to-one counting if you need to, but hopefully children will start to point and count and discover how many chicks they've got in their egg. Putting in different combinations of colours will really help them to look closely. And this is where you can practice that question. What do you see? How do you see it? So for example, the child here can see that there's 4 and is noticing that 3 are yellow and 1 are white. So really starting to see those patterns and relationships. What's really important, I think, also is to really think about how then you can move those activities on when the children are ready. And it's really important to think about mathematical mark making. This is possibly something that we sometimes miss. And what we don't want is for children to have to suddenly jump once they move through their school education into having to abstract forms of mathematical mark making. We want them to have these really rich experiences, because then they're understanding that kind of abstraction, that representation of mathematical thinking. Whiteboards are brilliant, and I'm sure we're all familiar with whiteboards, but providing that opportunity to represent your chicks on a whiteboard is really, really beneficial. And what was really nice with the children that I was working with the other day, they really spontaneously wanted to start writing numbers. So I didn't have any numerals out, but they wanted to start. And the little girl at the top, the sort of little squiggle is her 3. And if you can see the little boy down here, he's really nicely, clearly written a 2. So starting to match numeral to quantity, again, a really important mathematical skill. So from this sort of activity, you could then start thinking, well, what do I need to do next? Actually, maybe bringing out some number cards, you know, starting to match numeral and quantity and things like that could be the next step for those children. But really thinking about all those opportunities for mathematical mark making is really, really important. So hopefully what you've seen from those 2 examples is what you can do with younger children, and then how you might move an activity forward as children develop their mathematical skills. And what I just want to show you next is this progression document, and I think it's really quite helpful. So this is from the Education Endowment Fund, and I'll show you the link in a minute. But I think having a look at that kind of spiral, and it is purposely a spiral. Children don't learn in that linear fashion. We learn in sort of slightly different ways. Will help you but sort of see those kind of steps that children need to go through in order to develop that good number sense. So that fast recognition of items, we're just talking about that subitizing, that count sequence, starting to count with one-to-one correspondence, that cardinality, recognizing and naming digits, and then linking those together. So you can see in the examples that we've just shown how children are moving through that progression document. And I've just kind of highlighted that learning that was happening in those two examples. So those opportunities to subitize, both those standard and irregular arrangements, those engaging and motivating resources. If it's motivated, children are going to learn and want to stay and explore. Those opportunities to learn those counting principles. And remember, you might need to model that. When I showed the children the basket of eggs the other day, I had about 12 in there. We did some estimation first, but then I said, well, let's find out how many. And I really modeled how to count carefully. Let's line them up and touch and point and count, really emphasizing that one-to-one correspondence for those children that needed to. Really thinking about those opportunities to develop cardinality. We really want children to understand that, and that opportunity to start linking digits to quantities. So lots and lots of learning going on in two quite simple activities. So just moving on, I just want to touch, I'm very aware of the time as well. Just want to touch on a couple more things to think about. And the first one is books. So books are such an engaging and meaningful way to learn maths. These are some of my favourites, some that I really like to use. Some I'm sure will be familiar to you, some not so familiar. There's a website at the end that I'll share with you where they've got a brilliant resource where you can download a pamphlet, and it's full of lots of books that have got mathematical learning in them and opportunities for counting. So a really nice book list that you can access. But I really think when you're sharing books like this with children, really think about looking closely and lingering on the pages and thinking about, again, that brilliant question, what can you see? Look at the chicks on that page. There's so much to talk about there, isn't there? You can see two brown ones, but I can only see one white, one yellow, one black. How many altogether? Looking at the little boy carrying the lettuces, well, actually, I can start understanding that 3 and 1 make 4. But I think also, we've obviously been talking about smaller quantities mostly. It's really important that children think about bigger numbers. So in the Counting Fox book, which is, if you're not familiar with it, I really recommend it. It's really good. And there's a good bit of suspense at the moment as to whether the fox is going to eat the chickens. And then, of course, the chickens chase the fox. But what does 100 look like? I mean, it's great to think about big numbers. Like when you're 3, what is 100? So thinking about how you can represent that for children, maybe get 100 feathers. You're obviously probably not going to get 100 chickens, but, you know, really thinking about big quantities and being excited about big numbers. Again, we want children to have that curiosity and excitement, and books are a lovely way in. There's a really nice book about a penguin and stars, and it shows you 1,000,000 stars at the end. You know, how amazing. Like, what does 1,000,000 look like? Being able to sort of look at that visually, I think, is really, really exciting. So really think about how you can use your books carefully. The other book also that I'd really recommend is Mouse Count. If you're not familiar with Mouse Count, and really thinking about matching exciting resources with your book. So reading them, but really think the children absolutely love these mouse puppets. Using that tens frame to really show quantity and how, as the snake catches the mice and pops them in the jar ready to eat, again, very exciting. They're moving from that tens frame into the jar. So children are really seeing that changing quantity, but also understanding those patterns and relationships within 10. So reading and sharing something like that, and then leaving the children to explore those resources is really, really helpful, because then they can kind of take that learning into their own play. having those opportunities to access resources and books within your setting is really important. So really thinking about those good quality number displays. You know, if you've modelled to the children how to use the resources, then having them out in your setting for child initiated learning. If you're in setting, obviously, if you're in a home setting, you can have these more freely available in a more fluid way anyway. But really thinking about that use of, you know, lots of different resources to engage the children, you know, puppets and props and pictures, and the use of your tens frames and your fives frames as well. And then just finally to mention rhymes. We're all familiar with number rhymes, but they really are such a rich resource for helping children develop good number sense. And really, you could probably teach everything through a number rhyme. But again, really thinking about how those resources can support mathematical thinking. And I think what's really, really useful with numbers rhymes is that you can sort of change the resource. So you can start with something really concrete. So for example, the 5 blackbirds, start with their puppet, and you can start using resources that are slightly more abstract. So you're really helping children understand that kind of change from concrete, pictorial and abstract resources, which can then really lead nicely into mathematical mark making, and ultimately helping them understand how we sort of record mathematical thinking in a much more abstract way. So really thinking about, here's another example. So the 5 sausages rhyme, something that we then do is using butter beans. So these are a great maths resource. You can just get lots of butter beans and spray paint them one side. You can then do lots of lovely activities with double-sided resources like that, throwing them up in the air, counting how many hot sausages land on your frying pan. It's up to you. You can be as creative as you want to, but sort of then using those resources in a more kind of creative way, then maybe getting the children to draw sausages, start with that mathematical mark making. So starting with that kind of concrete experience first, and then sort of moving through to using those different resources with the children will keep them engaged with a number rhyme for a really long time. And again, that kind of immersion is really, really important. Getting them to return to it is really helpful. Just also finally, just to mention dice games, making your own games, again, such a brilliant opportunity to develop counting skills. And you can do, as you know, Joanna showed us, making your own dice, but you can really make any kind of dice you want to and tailor it to what your children need. So you could make a subitizing dice like the one at the top, the black spots. Actually, you really want the children to see those irregular arrangements of objects. Actually, what we're really focusing on is just counting up to 3. So you can tailor dice in a way that will suit your children, and really making a game around anything based on interest. So you could link it to a rhyme or a story or anything really, sort of, it can be as creative as you want to. And if children get really used to using these, they then start to make their own games, which is really, really exciting. And again, thinking about those opportunities for mathematical mark making. So finally, just to share some useful websites. So this is the Education Endowment Foundation website, which I'm sure some of you might be familiar with. So if you go onto this website, there is the Early Years Toolkit that gives you lots and lots of guidance. So the mathematical guidance is really helpful. There's an example of the progression documents that you might want to use. So again, quite helpful for maybe sharing with your teams. So people are really understanding that kind of progression in maths and how the kind of mathematical development that children need to go through. I'd also really recommend NCETM. And if you go on this website, you can find the progression documents. If you go into early years, you can find some really nice progression documents around counting and cardinality with some nice examples. And again, you could use that as a kind of assessment tool, thinking, well, what are we doing? Is this, are we doing enough of this, or do we need to do a little bit more of this? So the NCTM is really helpful, and it will also tell you where your nearest maths hub is. The Early Childhood Maths Group is an independent organisation made up of mathematical professionals. Lots of great stuff on there as well, some webinars, and that's where you can download the information on all the books to support maths. Enrich is also really good. There's a whole early years section. And there's some sheets that you can download to give you examples of early years activities. The golden bean activity is on there, so explaining how you can use your kind of butter beans, which is fun. And I'd also really recommend EY Maths. So this is run by a maths consultant called Karen Wilding. She's really interesting. She's got a huge amount to say about subitizing. So if you're interested in subitizing, check her out. She offers training as well. So those are just the kind of snapshots of the website, and these are the links that are just coming up now. So these are all the links to oh, and there's also the Erickson Institute, which is an American organisation, but again, lots of really, really good ideas on there. So hopefully some resources to go away and explore. There is so much, such a wealth of information out there, but I think really going to trusted and useful websites to really get that subject knowledge. And once you've got that, then you can really think about all those activities that you want to plan. And you can kind of be as creative as you want to. And I think that's it. We've come to the end.
Lucy, thank you so much.
3 minutes. There we go. I'm only 3 minutes over.
Well, that's not bad. I like you've both talked about maths being sometimes not the easiest subject when we've experienced that as in our earlier lives, but actually I think you've set it on fire for us tonight, you two. I feel inspired, and I'm hoping that everybody who's attended tonight's webinar will also take away something with them. I know, Lucy, you wanted people to put something in the chat around their sort of reflection from tonight, and Damon, you were also hoping that people might share their evaluation with you so that they can get a certificate. This will be recorded and it will be on the YouTube channel, so you will be able to check out and revisit it, because I think Lucy has given a wealth of information tonight, exemplified with some wonderful examples from Joanna, and also again from Good Nursery Practice. We will do a summary of the slides for you as well. I know someone's requested that in the chat, so I think Lucy and I will put together a summary for everyone. We hope you've all had an amazing time this evening, and we're hoping to bring lots more webinars your way, so do